Good morning, everyone. I will now call the hearing to order. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. This morning I will be chairing this hearing. My name is Robert Hutchings. On my direct left is Mr. Harden. On my far left is Mr. Merritt. Representing the Assessment and Taxation Department today is Mr. Wong, and our secretary today will be Ms. Rojo. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that the comparison of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by this Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed further to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following their swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony presented, followed by cross-examination by the appellant first, and then the panel members, and then the appellant's testimony, followed by again cross-examination by the assessor, and then the panel members. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. And please, out of courtesy, can everybody put their cell phones on silent during this hearing? First property on the docket today is 825 Sterling Lion. Mr. Neufeld, and it's a 2019 Realty Appeal.
Please state your full name.
Ken Wong.
And you affirm the evidence that present is the truth, or will you connecting with the truth?
Yes.
Please state your full name.
Rocky Neufeld.
And you affirm the evidence that present is the truth, or will you connecting with the truth?
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Neufeld, Mr. Wong. We're dealing first with 825 Sterling Lion Parkway, again a 2019 Realty Appeal. When you are ready, please.
Subject property is 825 Sterling Line. The roll number is 10006775960. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It's built in 2018. There are 68 suites with 50 indoor parking stalls and 60 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary.
Mr. Wong, sorry to interrupt. Would you mind speaking up because the air conditioning is on?
Okay.
Thank you.
It is kind of loud.
Yeah.
Great. The subject property is 825 Sterling Line. The roll number is 10006775960. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It's built in 2018. It has 68 suites with 50 indoor parking stalls and 60 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We used an average rent of $1,482 to get a potential income of $1,209,000. It's a 2.8% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $1,175,000. We used a 36% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $748,000. Kept at 5%. We have an estimated market value of $14,964,000. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents that we've used are in line with what's in the market. page 5 is information on how we derive our cap rates. On page 7 are some pictures of the subject property. Page 9 and 11 are the permits that were taken out for the subject property. On page 11, the indicated declared construction value for the property is $12 million. If you were to sort of look at the cost of the property, that usually involves the cost to construct the building, the cost to acquire the land, and for some entrepreneurial profit. When you consider that the cost of the building is about $12 million, the land is about in the area is about $20 a square foot, which in this case works out to about $1,373,000. And if you take into consideration some entrepreneurial profit of about 25%, which is $3 million, that works out to about a total of $16,373,000. That's very much in line with what the assessed value is at. The assessed value is at $14,964,000. So in this case, the rents are supported by the market, and the expenses that we've used are reasonable are in line with what is typical of a new building. And when you look at the cost for the property in terms of the cost of construction, the land, and profit that is usually involved, I believe that supports the assessed value, and as they maintain the value at $14,964,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Neufeld, any questions arising from the assessor's evidence presented?
Yes, on page 3, your evaluation, is this all derived from your model?
Yes, it is.
And because we are now a year past the previous round of appeals where numerous properties were brought in, and there were changes that the boards applied during that time, were there not? Like the boards made all alterations and changes to assessments on multifamily projects, to your knowledge?
There have been adjustments, and there have been no adjustments.
Sure, but now, your model doesn't consider any of the changes that the board enacted along the way, does it? This workup today? You didn't let that influence, you went right back to the model?
Correct.
Okay. And you would, so the model, you've got rental rates here, and you brought no capitalization rates of actual properties?
We did not provide any sales, no.
Now, this is a new apartment. Your parameters are 2.8% vacancy.
Yes.
Is it not reasonable to expect that a new apartment will take some time to fill up?
Yes, in this case, we allow for that time because the leasing up period actually started in early as 2018, and this wasn't put in until 2019, so we did take that into consideration.
Is this a policy?
It's just something that we do. I can't speak for everybody or the department or in terms of a policy, but it seems reasonable to take the lease up period into consideration.
Well, I understand, but the question was, is this an approved policy of the assessment department?
I'm not sure.
And is it applied evenly to every single new apartment, to your knowledge?
I'd like to think so, yes.
Is it?
If you're asking me to, speak for everybody and
Every-
how
yes, I'm asking
everybody
every
thinks in
single-
our department, I can't say.
Now, you were talking about costs, and you don't have a land sale on this, do you?
I do not.
Okay, so that was just an estimate.
It is an estimate.
And you also brought up entrepreneurial profit, which is first time I've ever heard that being brought up in a hearing. What is that theory founded on?
The cost approach.
Did you bring us some evidence of how that has worked, actual cases, actual data, where you've seen it being applied?
No. Usually when somebody builds something, if they're not gonna spend, say, $12 million and expect it to be worth $12 million. They're gonna expect to have some value on top of what they've invested.
Isn't the value they expect the return on investment, which is the revenue stream that generates from it?
That's one way, yes.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Mr. Harden, any questions of the assessor?
Yeah, following up on Mr. Neufeld's questioning, generally the cost approach is considered the cap on valuation. And to be quite honest, I've never heard of a profit factor on top of the cost approach before. Can you explain that a little again? I mean, the money, the value to the owner comes from the revenue being generated by that property, not from profit which would accrue through a sale of that property. Could you explain that profit a little bit more?
Sure. I said there is an income approach and there is a cost approach. There are different ways to come up with a value, and sometimes you would use both. You would use different approaches to try to validate one approach for the other. In this particular case, it's a newer building, so I think if a property owner, say, spends $10 million on it, they spend $1 million to acquire the land, and $10 million to build the property. If they put $11 million into it, they would not expect it to be worth $11 million. They would expect it to be. They're not going to put $11 million into it and expect it and not sort of get anything out of it in terms of the value of the property. So that's pretty much where that comes from. It's like I said, it's sort of separate from the income, but in this particular case, it's a way of looking at it to sort of validate or verify what the value that we've estimated in terms of an income approach. So I guess maybe that's how I would explain it. If you were to spend $11 million on it, you might expect it to be worth more than that, and not expect it to be worth exactly what you put into it.
Okay.
From a cost approach.
Now your cap rate, you went to, your cap rate, you went to the lowest possible cap rate of 5%. Is that because it was completely new?
Yeah, for buildings in this age category, like all the buildings that are newer, it received a 5% cap rate. So it's treated exactly like all other properties that are similar.
Okay, that's your business questions.
Thank you, Mr. Harden. Mr. Merritt, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wong, you got a chance to visit the property at all?
Yes.
Okay. So you can tell us about the exterior cladding, et cetera, and you went physically to the
I did physically go, yes.
Okay. So, did they provide you a rent roll at all?
Yes.
And this is what you used in your determination of the property? Partly?
Partly, yes.
Okay. And so, can you tell us about, this is a new building, were there any incentives in regards to the rent? Like any free or, moving costs or anything like that? I think they're referred to as ITs, okay?
Is that determined in the rent roll?
Actually, I don't know if the rent roll was provided. All I have in my notes here is what the rents were, and I'm not sure if there were any inducements, but inducements are a possibility for sure.
In the permit details, it talks about 71 units in there.
Yeah.
And you have got 68. So what is the correct number?
The correct number is 68. As far as we're able to tell.
And your market value, you just extracted that from the income approach? There's no sales analysis in regards to new units, so you just plunked it in there?
It was a way to give you another, to try to verify our income approach.
Yeah. But there's no direct sales analysis or anything?
I did look at the land sales in the area, and they were about, on a few of the parcels that sold in the area, they were about $20 a square foot, which works out to about.
Yeah, but that's land only. What about
Yeah.
Units itself?
We didn't do any comparable sales for the units itself. There aren't that many. And
And the reason for the 5% cap rate is because it's a new building?
that's the cap rate that
Okay.
is applied to similar buildings, new buildings, and of that age.
Okay. And the city wouldn't have a lower cap rate, would it?
In this case, no.
Okay, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Wong, your history details permits taken out March 2018. From your notes or from the assessor who did the original inspection, any details of when these suites started to rent out? Or lease up, I guess.
In April of 2018,
They were starting to be leased in April of 2018?
yes, as far as according to the property manager.
Okay. And so and my understanding is this supplementary assessment became effective January 1st, 2019?
Yes.
So you gave them that 7-8 months for leasing up as an allowance for
Yeah,
lease up time?
it was, yes, we did.
Okay. And they would have been responsible for the land portion only, an assessment?
Prior to that, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And any idea on, you said you had notes on the rental rates, any idea if utilities are included or any details like their parking, that kind of thing?
Tenant pays their own heat and hydro.
Okay. And parking, I guess?
Yeah, the underground parking is $147 a month, and the outdoor parking is $60 a month.
Okay. And any idea on the lease rates on the individual styled units?
$1,282 for a one-bedroom, $1,696 for a two-bedroom, and $2,088 for a three-bedroom.
Any idea on the actual vacancy rate, or are they fully leased? Currently fully leased?
The current situation, I'm not, the latest information that we had in terms of their vacancy was September 2018 at 14.7%.
Okay, in September. So April. So 4 months after, okay. Beginning of leasing. Okay. Those are all my questions, thank you. Mr. Neufeld, when you are ready, please. Thank you.
This is the third or fourth building in a complex. So the owner has built the buildings, and as they become absorbed, added another building, and this is the last one in their development. And what we have provided on page 3 is the statement, and in the statement, they have, this is post-reference, and it's shown for illustration. You'll see that they list their potential rent as if every unit is rented, and that's 1.11 million annual. Now, we compare that to the assessment department, which lists that at 1,209,000. So there's a $100,000 gap there. Now, there is some parking income later, there's 50,000, but there's still a $50,000 gap between potential income, actual potential income 2 years after the reference date and what the assessors applied. So there's our first problem. Our second problem is the vacancy. Now, I think the 14.7 that the assessors bring up is not supported by the financial statements here. You can see, although this is for a full year, that the actual vacancy is about well over 40%. And that's startup, typical startup vacancy. And on the page 4, you can see the actual NOI, and it does work out to 445,000. Now that's a startup year, and it's not what we've applied, but it illustrates the problem on the startups, new apartment startups. What we've done is we've looked at that potential income and applied a 10% vacancy, which is a reasonable startup. Now, the 10% vacancy is likely going to be in effect on a new building startup. It'll hover around there for buildings like this. We would anticipate about a 5-year period of absorption, because you'll notice that there are rental incentives. So right now, it's a question of trying to fill up with your incentives, usually 1 month free rent, and then you're gonna lose 20% of your people after the first year because they're moving on to the next apartment that has a discount. And because, you know, people who live in apartments don't have a lot of stuff to move. It's not like buying a house. My first apartment, it's funny, it's on the docket next, Mr. Reimer's handling it. I barely lasted a year in that place. But that's the nature of apartment living, and so what we've seen with this particular group is that they've been hitting 10%. It's been a startup, and it goes up, down, up, down. So next year, as I said, lease up time, renewals, they'll drop down to 20%, and then they'll crawl back up to maybe 5-6%, and then second year renewals, it goes down to 13-14% and so on. So we typically look at a 5-year stabilization on these. Now, in the financial world, everything is a look forward principle. So when we look at this as an investment, you'll put a 10-year window on it, and in a 10-year period, the stabilization occurs. But in assessment, we are doing point in time, and as a result, we have to take account for a hypothetical sale as of the reference date of a property that is impacted by high vacancy. So 10%, which we've applied, potential income is reasonable, and the NOI, I believe, is extremely reasonable in that respect. We use the same expense ratio that the assessment department uses, which I would have said 35 to 40% is where building this rental structure and the offloading of utilities, that's roughly where it should come in at. And you'll notice the actual expenses were lower than that, but that's first year expenses. You haven't had to fix a single apartment on a turnover yet. An interesting issue on the newer apartments that are commanding higher rents is when they have to redo them after they lose the first tenant, they're going to spend a lot more money than if it were on Furby. And because in order to get the high rent, you have to deliver a new product back to the second tenant. It usually means completely new flooring, painting, and a review of any fixtures that will be replaced. So a turnover will run you $3,000 approximately versus a turnover on a downtown unit. It might be a couple $100 for a steam cleaning and a wash down. And those are the realities and of this. So that's the income we use. Now, the cap rate we've applied at 5.75, that is really the highest rate that we've seen in our city. And you've heard me go through this, board members in the past, about how the Collier's cap rates are derived. And page 8, of course, our sales blurb. These are, this is an investment grade property. This would go into our cap rate study. And you can see that our study goes from 5 to 5.75. This is a low rise. And these numbers include land transfer fees and commissions. So this property would be expected to be between 5.5 and 6 after it for valuation purposes. And we've selected 5.75. On page 13, again, it's just something about the cost of money. In order to actually create a return on investment and loan money, break even I've calculated there is a required NOI of 5.4% cap rate. That's to cover your loan. So no one's building unless you're going to have a projected return in excess of 5.4%. And we have some comparables on page 23 and 4. And in particular, the two new blocks on Ward. Page 23 is, this was brought up several times last year as being an error in a report that someone had made on it. We sold the property, we have financials, 5.5%, 3-story walk-up. Page 24 this is a new construction project built in 2014. Coincidentally, it's the same ownership group. So their projection on it was 8% on construction costs and return on investment, and it ended up being 6% because they were impacted by a higher than projected vacancy. And so that's my presentation, and I do have some closing comments.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Mr. Wong, any questions of the evidence presented by the appellant?
So the evidence you've presented is post-reference information?
The financials are post-reference, that is correct.
Okay, so your valuation is based off of post-reference information?
Yes, well, in the final analysis, the
Well, it's just
conclusion.
yes or no?
And that's not a yes or no answer, I'm sorry. In the final analysis, our conclusion was based on our opinion of value as of that time period. we did look at the actual performance of the property 2 years in the future. We didn't just apply it without thinking. It was a conscious decision.
That would be all my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Hart, any questions of the appellant?
Okay, do you know what the actual vacancy rate was as of January 1st of this year?
It's in my files. And I'm only going from memory. It was somewhat similar to what the assessor brought up at 15%.
Okay, now, looking at the pictures that the assessor had and that, I wouldn't, it doesn't look like you call these luxury apartments. How would you typify this? I mean, the kitchen looks, in particular, rather basic. Not what you'd expect in a high-end apartment.
Well, yeah, I think this is what you'd expect as the new normal above average suite. They're in Winnipeg, the market for premium rental accommodations is very, very limited. There's not a lot of users. This is I would call it average new quality. You can see in the picture, for example, bottom right, the kitchen picture, that they do have HVAC run through the bulkheads. So, but then beside it, there's a baseboard heater there. So that baseboard's cheap, and so it's not a package unit system. The packaging, the ducting is simply for the kitchen, and that's a laminate floor. One-piece bath, so it's not tiled. It's, I suppose by location, it's good, because being where it is in Sterling Lion, that would be its attraction. Rents seem to be getting higher in the south end of the city, both in that development and then the new ones going up near the university are being able to command better rents.
But the target market then is kind of the average renter and not the luxury end of.
No, yeah, that's correct. It's gonna be a double income arrangement. I don't know what words we're supposed to use these days. We can't say couples. A double income occupant with two incomes to pay the rent. And it's someone who's got an average paying job.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mr. Merritt, any questions of the appellant?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Newfield, I'm in just looking at the whole picture. I see that there's a discrepancy all the way through here of $100,000. NOI?
In
100,000.
In what way?
Compared to the city.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
Okay.
yeah, and
So-
that's a vacancy.
Yeah.
And,
And-
well, it was an overstatement of revenue and an understatement of vacancy, yeah.
But everything points to the 100,000.
Yes, that's
Okay.
a reasonable conclusion.
So your cap rate, I guess you can't have everything. Okay. So.
I'll cover that
so
in
you-
summary.
Okay, so your cap rate,
Yes.
why are you using the 5 3/4?
The honest answer is that I don't believe in the low caps at 5, and all through our assessment cycle, I would never yield on that principle, and I'm not going to yield today. And I understand where the board is coming from, so I'm a realist yet principled.
So, your analysis for the vacancy of 10%,
Yes,
which equates to $100,000,
yes.
you know, tell us about how you extracted the 10% cap rate, I mean, the 10% vacancy.
Oh, the 10% was calculated from the potential 2018 income as full, which was reported accurately. This is how much it could make. And it didn't make that. It made, you know, the actual rental income, if we went to actuals, was around $650,000 actual gross revenue. So we just took as full 10% because it did fill up through the year. But when we approached at the end of our first absorption period, it stayed strong at 10%. Our experience with the other buildings in this complex is similar in terms of that absorption rate.
Okay, I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. I've got a couple of questions for you, Mr. Neufeld. I'm just doing some quick calculations here, okay. Okay, first of all, in your presentation, you say 2018 supplemental and 2018 assessment. I guess you do mean 2019?
Yeah.
Okay.
We kept wondering if an 18 was gonna come out, but
Okay.
yes, I guess we,
All right. And on your, I would assume, we don't see a workup of how you got these numbers. This page one is a summary.
oh, no, the workup is there. It took me a while to remember how it was done. On page one, at the bottom left, it says potential income, 1,136,000 as full. And then when the 10% was taken off there to get 1,022,000.
Okay.
And then that was transferred up to the top under revenue. And then 36.36% subtracted for expenses to come up with 650,000
Okay.
NOI.
So the assessor's got 1,209,000 potential rent. You've got 1,136,000. What rent did you he's detailed and in testimony said that the rents that he's that are actually higher than his model rent. You're way lower in potential rent.
Well, that is incorrect, this statement, then, because I've given you the statement.
But that's a post-reference statement.
Oh, well, then it should be lower if you backed it up then, right? I
Well-
mean, we don't have, we didn't introduce the evidence to back it up, and going backwards to make a downward adjustment on income is a post-reference technique. So remember earlier when I answered the question about whether we're relying on post-reference, if we had, I would have taken the 1,136,000, then taken it back the RTB value every year, which is a good base point, so that brings us down another 4% in income. We didn't do that.
But what are the potential rents on 68 units? You're saying it's 1,136,000.
That's correct.
Okay, and the assessor's been saying 1,209,000.
I understand that.
Okay, so you seem to be having lower rents than he's using, am I right?
The actual 2018 income is lower than their potential
But
2016.
potential, if looking at potential, right? Not actual, potential.
No, potential this is the rate. So if you go back to my statement, you can see that the top monthly rent, that is revenue as full, 1,110,000. Then there's a vacancy that they took off it. These are the units that aren't rented. This is the way statements are now, are generally done by a professional property manager, is they detail your vacancies in front of you. Now, this isn't the way the city collects the information, but this is the way
Okay.
the property manager does.
Calculate for me what your blended rate is for monthly rent.
Okay. $1,393.
$1,393, okay.
And I believe, what did the assessors?
$1,482.
Yeah, and he also quoted a range of askings from 1,292 to, he said, 2,088.
2,082, okay,
Yeah.
okay, all right. Page 25, page 23, pardon me, of your cap rate study. 333 Ward is, I guess, the newest building, although it's 12 years older than the subject property. Got a cap rate of 5.5%. The rest are significantly older buildings.
Yeah, I think that's the most comparable, and as well as the development property on page 24.
Okay, is this, I think you made a statement, this is a walk-up? These are walk-ups at 333 Ward, there's no elevators? Does this subject property have elevators?
I don't know. I don't see an elevator utility on the rooftop on page 7. I see a make the fair and a stairwell. So, I can't answer that question.
Mr. Wong, any comment? Is there elevator in the subject?
The subject? Yes.
Yeah, there's elevators. And 333 Ward, is there indoor parking, or is it all outdoor?
You were asking these questions last year. Let me think. I don't have the answers to those questions. And to tell you the truth, I can't even tell you that whether it has an elevator or not.
Okay.
3 stories is not code to have an elevator, but if you're getting, this is similar rental rates as the subject, to get them, you're going to have to be elevated. So I now will have to check that out for the next time.
Okay, so I guess what I'm getting at here is that we've got a comparison for the cap rate study, 12 years older, without elevators and no indoor parking. What kind of, and you're using 5.75, you said this was your best, you're consider it your best comparison. Any adjustment warranted for 5.5 for the 12-year difference, and no elevator service, and location probably.
Well,
Tuxedo Estates there.
Right, okay,
And
so,
indoor parking.
okay, so I'll do these one by one. The year built, I don't think, you may actually see the opposite of a better cap rate for the Ward one, because it had stabilized its revenue. It was to the point where they weren't gonna be running into a lot of deferred maintenance problems as a 20 or 40-year-old building would. So it was, your R&M was related to suite turnover. So the stabilization of the income is a more stable revenue stream, so it should be more aggressive cap rate. The underground parking is a mixed thing. I think it attracts a higher rental rate, but as far as maintenance goes, again, indoor parking is a not, it brings up more non-recoverable costs. And moisture damage, and HVAC, air handling equipment. So if you have a vacancy in your parking and a decline in income, you're riskier to have that underground parking. It's the same as downtown. Why aren't there more lots downtown? Why do we like our open lots? Because they're a cheap, good, stable risk. And so I have a mixed on that. I think it attracts better rent, but it might not be, I think it's a negative on the cap. The location, I can't see a major difference there. Ward was probably one of the first areas that opened up and did more multifamily because the land was available there at that point in time. And then the the Sterling lands came available after the whole IKEA development started off saying it's a timing issue. Both are in the south part of the city, both are located close to very large shopping centers. Again, I wouldn't say that there's anything to hang my hat on as a major difference. And I'm not just trying to promote my argument, right? I mean, I hadn't thought this through, and you posed the question, and that's just my natural response.
Okay. And it's sold at, or your analysis says 5.5%, and you're asking us to adjust the cap rate on the subject property to 5.75.
Well, I'm asking to adjust it and all, to adjust it.
Okay.
I understand.
Okay, and regarding the land ownership, the permit said it was owned by CNR at the time of the issuance of the permits. Was the land purchased by the developer?
I thought so, and I'm wondering if maybe the title hadn't gone through at this point in time, or, I mean, it could be a long-term land lease. I thought we had fee simple title here, but I noted that on the other properties as well in this complex. But they're not involved whatsoever.
No, just it was a time frame thing, I guess, when the permit was.
I believe it was, yes, when the permit came out, they were the title owner.
Okay. That is all my questions. Mr. Wong, any requirement for a summary at all?
Sure. The rents that we've used are supported by the market, and the parameters that we use are supported by the market. And when we look at the cost of the property, being approximately $16 million, I believe that supports the assessed value. And I estimate you maintain the assessed value at $14,964,000.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Neufeld?
Yes, thank you. Firstly, this concept of a grace period, that's not in the policies of the assessment department, and to have it being brought up at a hearing when you're appealing value, we already did you a favor, that's not appropriate. It's the value. They didn't want to assess that at that point in time. That's nothing to do with the value. They were not given a break then. This is, you're not to, I don't believe you should be listening to that at all, but your call, my opinion. The concept of entrepreneurial profit, I don't mean anything by this personally against the assessor, but that's completely incorrect. The concept of entrepreneurial profit would be for, say, a subdivision project, where your profit is derived from the sale of individual units itself. You take on a development and you plan to sell it. Then you get your income from the profit. So a big chunk of land, you chop into little lots for homes, you turn a profit on it, reasonable, 20–25%. The profit on this project was designed to come from the rate of return on the rent. So that's a double dipping concept and a misapplication. So the actual costs was $12 million, and a concept of land value, $1.3 million, that takes us to $13,300,000. That's the number that the cost of those should have applied, which is well under the assessed value. The income we applied, true, came from past the reference period, but it's a good indication of what happens on the absorption cycle of new product. And the last comment is the fourth building in the complex, and all the properties were brought into appeal. Same issue we brought forward, the absorption, so some were adjusted by the NOI, some were adjusted by the cap. No, they didn't do both. But again, it's a question of principle, and I think both they should be considered, but the 5% is generally not stood up at the boards, and because there's been no evidence to support it. Thank you, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Neufeld. Okay, that concludes 825 Sterling Lyon Avenue. Yeah, okay, just, okay. break here. No. Thanks, Belen. I will now call the hearing back to order. Next property on the docket is 1681 Pembina Highway, and we are dealing with a 2018 realty assessment. I guess it's a supplementary assessment.
Please state your full name. And you have firmly evidence to represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Wong, so we're dealing with 1681 Pembina Highway, and I see it's a 2018 assessment. If you wouldn't mind detailing why it's 2018, maybe give us a little overview there when you're making your presentation, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
The subject property is 1681 Pembina. The roll number is 030-929-97065. And I believe there was a replot that resulted in a supplementary notice, and that's the appeal that we have here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they may, it looks like they may have been, the rear portion of the existing lot might have been replotted for transit purposes.
Okay. So there's sorry to interrupt, so there's a change in land size or?
I think there was a small change in land size.
Okay.
I'm not sure, I got the impression that
I
the
can
back.
assist if that helps.
Okay.
So I have the benefit of having the original brief filed by Mr. Lucky relating to the property, the land size then, and I think Mr. Wong's exactly right. There's a, I don't know, I assume it would be for transit purposes. The original land area of this parcel was 304,463 feet, and now it is 303,692. So they took like 800 square feet off the land.
Okay.
And so it was minuscule, and obviously had no bearing on the value.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Go ahead, Mr. Wong.
This is a residential apartment building that's comprised of 9 buildings that are 2 stories high. It's built in 1972 and has 189 suites with 230 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $956 to get a potential income of $2,169,000. We use the 2.8% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $2,109,000. And we use the 51% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $1,030,000, kept at 5.25%. We have an estimated market value of $19,628,000. On page 4 are our rent comparables, and the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. Page 7 is an overview of the subject property. On page 9 to 21 are the income and expenses submitted by the owner. On page 12, their operating income was about $854,000, and that's lower than what the model was estimated, but their budgeted net operating income is about $1,056,000. Which is a little bit higher than the model is estimated at $1,030,000. I think maybe looking at the budgeted operating income is reasonable. When you look at page 10, just above the middle of page 10, they have a fence repair at 999,000, or sorry, 99,000. Sorry. It looks like they're including some capital expenditures in there, so. I believe that their budgeted operating income is a reasonable estimate of income for the property, which is in line with what the model has estimated. On page 23 and 25 are permits that were taken out for the subject property. The first permit, they're regrading the existing crawl space for the nine buildings at a construction value of $830,000. And on page 25, there's exterior alterations with a construction value of $1,100,000. So when you look at the actual performance of the property, it supports the model value and asks that you maintain the assessed value at $19,628,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reimer, any questions on the assessor's presentation?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wong, on page 1 of your materials, the actual year built and the effective year are the same at 1972, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Turning to page 3, the valuation of the subject, if I'm understanding correctly, from top to bottom, right through potential rent down to cap rate, that's all model-driven?
I believe so.
And there's no sales evidence that the department has provided to the board this morning?
With regards to cap
With
rates, no.
respect to cap rates, okay. Now, you had mentioned, if I could ask the board members and Mr. Wong, if you can turn to page 12. Now, you'll agree that when we're valuing the property, we are looking, in fact, at the performance, the actual performance of the property leading up to the reference date, correct?
Yes.
Now, and you've mentioned that, of course, there was a variance between the actual and the budget, but the budget was, you'll agree with me that the budgets are prepared well in advance of the year that the budget applies to, and that simply represents the owner's best estimate of what the property is going, the property is going to perform, correct? Is that fair?
I think it's fair to say, I don't know how far ahead they forecast, but it is what the owners of it are estimating.
It'll be in the year prior. Would you agree with that?
I am not sure.
I can state categorically, and I guess I put it to you, that the budgets are prepared in the year prior to the year affected by the budget. So for 15, then, we've got the variance, as you correctly pointed out, of about 200,000. You suggested to this board that the budget figure should be used, and I'm not going to dwell on this because at the end of the day, our NOIs are virtually identical. But since you brought it up, when we turn to the 2014 statement, and if one turns to the page, I guess that's 18, again, there's an operating income of 946,000 that is 144,000 less than budget again, correct?
Yes.
So in fact, while the budgets represent the best estimates, certainly the performance of the property itself could vary for very good reasons and has for those 2 years, correct?
Well, as I pointed out, it seems like they're including capital expenditures in their expenses, so it's probably not the expenses are probably, if you exclude those, the expenses are probably a little bit lower.
But you've made an assumption concerning fencing. Now, fencing can be repaired or replaced, and that would be a routine maintenance item, would it not?
I'm just trying to imagine spending $100,000 a year on fencing.
Well, except this is a very, very, very large, this is a property with an area of 303,000, so it is fully, what is that, 8 acres? This is an 8-acre site. So this isn't a little residential lot where you're paying sort of $30 a lineal foot for fencing.
Oh, I'm not saying that it would be cheap to fence it, I'm just saying that just for example, the fencing repairs are $400 in 2013. So I'm just saying that they might be including some capital expenditures.
Okay, and I guess I'd suggest to you that certainly there's recurring expenses, and while they may be very high one year, they'll be lower the next one.
Excuse me.
Now, with respect to page 23, you brought up the permit detail. This is for, and I believe you alluded to it, but this is to regrade crawl spaces and install sump pits, correct?
Looks like yes.
And it was from 2016. The issue date, sorry, was January 20th of 2017. And what was the purpose? Is this just to show that the building's being reasonably maintained, or?
Just to show what work has been done.
Okay, so an $800,000 permit for weeping tile and sump pit was, you're not suggesting that this is adding significant value, additional value to the property, correct?
No.
And the next permit that you show is from 2011, correct? The very last page is from 2011.
Actually, I take that back. It may suggest an added value in the sense that it's a problem that has been taken care of, and so.
I'm going to suggest, Mr. Wong, that is a necessary and requirement for maintenance, not adding value. You're simply maintaining the asset and income stream that you've got there.
Could be.
Okay.
It's just work that's been done.
No debate about that. I would agree with that entirely. Mr. Chairman, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Merritt, any questions of the assessor's evidence?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wong, our V-Day for the subject property is, can you repeat that for us?
The what?
The V-Day?
Valuation date.
Valuation
Yes.
date? April 1st, 2016.
And are all of them two-bedroom?
Yes.
Did you get a chance to go to the property or drive past it or anything?
I have not.
So you can't really tell us and just tell looking at the picture whether it's stucco or brick?
Unfortunately, no.
So, but you can put a value on it without looking at it?
Well, we have all the attributes for the property, and that's how we value. We value based off of the attributes, and we try to update the characteristics if necessary.
So if you haven't been to the property, does it have an elevator inside or is it a walk-up?
I'm not sure.
Based on your knowledge, based on the picture that
I would think it's a walk-up.
okay. And it consists of 9 buildings on the property?
Yes.
And the cap rate of 5.25% is based on the age, I assume?
The age and location, yes.
Okay. And when would it possibly go to 5.5%? You know offhand?
I believe it might be in the 1950s.
1950s. So the cap rate is just randomly or, according to the model based on the age, so without going to the property, you can put a value on it just based on the age?
Like the cap rate is based off of this income and expense and sales information that the department has.
So, you know, I guess it's almost like, so you can't tell us whether there's any cracks in the foundation or anything like that? I mean, you know, like, you know, any graffiti on the building or anything like that? You just put the value on it based on, or the cap rate based on the age?
Yes. We try to estimate the value as best we can.
Yes.
We do inspect the properties periodically to update any information when necessary. I mean, if the property owners tell us that there are structural issues with the properties, we try to reflect that as well.
So the owner hasn't come to you or anything like that? There's nothing on the field sheets or
Not
anything like
not
that?
that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
So as far as I know, it's just your normal two-story walk-up.
So Mr. Reimer brought up the fact that I think we're talking about a replot here,
Yes.
and it's less than 800 square feet
Of land.
of land, and that's the reason for the replot? I mean,
Yeah. Like legally, it has to be correct. And that's why they did it.
okay. And there was some permits taken out that total close to $2 million.
Yes.
And I think that the applicant may tell us about that later on, so thank you, Mr. Walden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Hart, any questions?
Okay, first of all, on the permits, while we're on that subject. The first one on page 23 is a 2017 permit, is that correct? So it looks like it'd be January 20th, 2017?
Yeah, it looks like that's when it was issued, yes.
So that would be post-reference year material, which we're not allowed to consider that.
It's information that represents the current condition of the property. I'm
Physical, current physical.
Okay. Now, that would, and also the 2011 permit, it seems to indicate it applies to all 9 buildings on that property. Is that
Yes.
correct? So that's the amount that could be apportioned to this one building would be 1/9 of that?
for each building, yes.
Yeah.
The subject, I mean, the roll number encompasses nine buildings.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, so this is for all 9 buildings?
Yes, yes.
Okay, not just
Not just one, no.
not just one, okay. I thought since the, maybe let me just clarify that each building seems to have their own number. And my assumption was we're dealing with, on page 7, that one just labeled 1680.
No, the roll number encompasses all 9 buildings, and so that's, we have 189 suites.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I understand now. I understand now, okay. Was this property previously appealed for the 2018 assessment year?
Yes, it was.
Was? And was there, are you aware if there was a decision from the board on it?
I'm not,
I can assist with that as well,
yeah,
if I may.
sure.
Might as well deal with it now, I guess.
So the original 2018 was appealed, and just prior to the hearing, it came to light that this replot was happening with a very small adjustment in the land. And as a result, that appeal, because it was gonna be superseded by the supplementary assessment, that appeal was withdrawn prior to the hearing with the intent to appeal the supplementary when it comes up, knowing that that was gonna be the valid appeal. So there's no board order on it.
No border, okay. Did the assessment materially change between the original assessment?
It didn't change $1. The only thing that changed was that land area adjustment of 800 feet. And
Okay.
that's it in all respects.
All right, so that 800 square feet didn't generate any material change in the value? Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't think I have any questions, Mr. Wong. Just bear with me 1 second, please. So, I guess I'm gonna get back to the point that Mr. Weimer questioned you on regarding the budgeted total as opposed to the reality of the statement.
Yeah.
What would, I'd written down 1,056,000 budgeted, projected, I guess.
Yeah.
What was the actual,
It's right beside it, the number's right beside it.
I'm sorry, I lost page.
It's on page 12.
12, okay, 12. Okay. And what number would the actual be, if you don't mind?
It's right, it's 854,000.
854. Is this on page 12?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, may I approach?
Sure.
Mr. Wong, if you wanna.
So Mr. Wong's referencing on page 12.
Yes.
It's the operating income here, so this is the budget,
Yes.
right here,
Okay.
that right there. And
Yeah.
this is the actual.
Okay. Oh, yeah, there we are, actual, okay. And budget, okay.
Where is that? Okay. Oh, okay.
And in your opinion, you've, I think you stated that the budgeted, you put weight in the budgeted.
Yeah, it's just because it appears that there are some capital expenditures because they spent $100,000
Oh,
on
okay.
fencing.
I see.
On fencing in that year, and
Okay, yeah.
it didn't get put into a capital category or anything, so it,
Okay, in your opinion, the actual, in your opinion, might be low, that there might be some items included in there that in your opinion should be capital expenses.
Correct.
Not maintenance, okay, okay. Yeah, that answers that question, okay. So in your opinion, what kind of adjustment would you, I'm not sure if you've analyzed it that much, but if you made an adjustment on that 854, in your opinion, what would that be? Would you revise it upwards to, I'm asking you for an estimate, a number.
yeah. I think their budgeted amounts have been similar for a few years, and so I think their budgeted operating income of $1,056,000 is reasonable,
Oh,
and
okay.
it is in line with what the model is estimated.
Okay, okay. I'm just asking his opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have lots to say about this.
Okay, all right. Okay. I think that's all my question. That makes sense from what you were speaking. Okay. Mr. Reimer, when you're ready,
Thanks,
please.
Mr. Chairman. I'm going to preface all of these comments with in the context of our submissions. The only thing that's at issue here is cap rate. There's been a lot of now questions and a lot of statements concerning some items that I believe need to be addressed very clearly for this board.
Okay.
The first topic I wanted to address is the permits. So the department's chosen at pages 23 and 24 of Mr. Wong's brief, they've chosen to submit permits. The implication being that, this is adding, in theory, some or perhaps significant value. It is not. It is not adding $1 of value, and I will tell you why for 2 reasons. With respect to page 23, the 2017 permit, and I am agreeing, by the way, Mr. Hardman brought up the question about post-reference. I am agreeing that the information as to physical condition as of January 1st, 18, which this would relate to, is appropriate, so I don't disagree with that. But here's why it adds no value. We're talking about an $800,000 permit for a $20 million assessment that relates to weeping tile and sump pits. This is purely maintenance, to making sure your building is not going to flood out. It's to make sure the foundation doesn't get damaged by improper sump pit or weeping tile. So is this going to affect, ultimately, at the end of the day, this property is valued out properly on the income approach. Is this going to affect the income approach? Not one bit. Now, with respect to the 2011 permit, which is the last page of the assessor's materials, this was all, if you read the details, exterior alterations. It's talking about removing exterior mansard sidings and installing insulation, EIFC and new siding, replacing canopies. Okay, so this is all work that's being done in a very large apartment complex with a value of $1.1 million in 2011. Any additional incremental rent, which I'm gonna suggest would be nominal because you don't want the apartment to look like a dump, but you also, this kind of thing is just making sure that it has a proper curb appeal, but going further, any additional revenue being generated by this 2011 permit is fully recognized in the statements for 2013, 14, and 15, leading up to the valuation date. So our valuation 100% would take into account these permits, and these permits in and of themselves do not provide the board with any guidance whatsoever as to additional value that might be added to the property, which we're suggesting would be completely reflected in the income valuation. Now, Mr. Wong has chosen one item and has suggested that the budgeted amounts would be appropriate. Well, no, actually. The budgeted amounts are the amounts, these are the owner's best estimates of what the property will do in the following year. And
I'm sorry, is he presenting? Are you presenting something?
I am indeed. I am indeed presenting the information in response to your submission. So you raised it, Mr. Wong, I'm addressing it. Mr. Wong has chosen one particular item regarding the fencing for 2015 that he's suggesting would be capital. My suggestion, when you've got a 9-building complex, what that $20 million assessment is, that is not a material. If you want to talk about those, go into that level of expenses and dissecting them, there's going to be all kinds of other expenses that are fluctuating, as this one was, and a $100,000 expense in a $20 million valuation is simply not material, and to suggest that the budgeted figures should be used rather than the actual is simply incorrect using the income approach. Now, going one step further, if you take that 2015 statement that was alluded to, and if you go back to the assessor's brief on page 12, now, again, what was brought up was the $100,000 in fencing. Well, okay, so let's just take, even if, just for the benefit of the doubt, if you take the majority of that fencing cost out, assuming it's capital, although if it's capital, you would need to budget for it every single year. But then you're gonna go from an NOI, a reported actual NOI of $854,000 to an NOI that would be no more than $950,000, not $1,056,000. So that notion of using budgeted figures instead of actuals is completely, in my submission, incorrect as far as the way investors are going to view the property. So when, if I can ask then the board members and Mr. Wong to turn to the very last page of our submission. This is the actual evaluation of the property using the actual stabilized figures. And so the actual NOI, if one looks, we've got the 4 columns, 2013, 14, 15, and then the average column, and then our stabilized column. If you look through the materials, you'll see that the actual NOI, this is the actual performance of the property, in 2013 was $1,027,000, in 14 it was $959,000, in 15 it was $959,000, its average is $981,000, and we've actually stabilized at $1,040,000, which is $10,000 higher than the department's model-driven NOI. So having said all that, because these issues were raised, we believe actually the model did a very fine job in this particular case of coming up with a stabilized NOI, but it wasn't using budgeted amounts. That notion just cannot stand. Now, taking that $1,040,000 then, and if I could ask the board and Mr. Wong to turn to our cap rate study. On page 1, There's actually one property on here that was already discussed in the earlier hearing, and that's a brand-new building and would have virtually no relevance to the subject, being a sort of 1972 vintage. I'm suggesting, Mr. Chairman, that especially 650 Stafford, and also the remaining three properties, but 650 Stafford is probably the one of the most comparable in terms of age. Smaller building, mind you, it's 26 units, all in one building. But certainly the level of comparability, we're suggesting 5.67% for that property would be a very good indicator of a rate of return for the subject. And the remaining three there, as shown as 5.57, 5.65, and 5.85% for St. Anne's, Archibald, and Hargrave respectively. So in that context, with this two, and by the way, I can confirm as well as was discussed, there's no elevator, it's a walk-up property. So in that context, we're suggesting 5.75 as a cap rate for the subject property would be appropriate. And so if one applies the 5.75 as per our valuation, the requested value this morning is $18,088,000. Having in mind, again, keeping in mind that the stabilized NOI that we're applying is significantly higher than the actual performance of the property in the 2 years leading up to the reference date. So certainly between that and the actual cap rate evidence that we're providing, we believe 5.75 is certainly very appropriate and request accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Mr. Wong, any questions of the appellant?
No questions.
Mr. Harden, any questions of the appellant?
Yeah, given that the NOIs are practically the same, and it seemed to be all cap rate, given the size of the property, the number of units, how would that affect a cap rate? Would it be more stable? Would it be a lower cap rate, less risk?
No. And the reason I say that is because this is a series of, and Mr. Wong correctly pointed out, this is a series of 8 buildings spread over a significant lot. So actually the stabilized expenses when you're talking about, as opposed to a single building, as opposed to it being spread out, much larger maintenance costs for maintaining the yard. You've got 8 different roofs instead of one roof, and no, it would actually, if anything, I'd suggest that the cap rate for the subject would be, if anything, a little bit higher than a single building of similar vintage. Now, the other risk that, as far as income risk goes, the NOI that we've applied is actually better than the stabilized, the actual NOI for the property in 14 and 15. So if anything, I'd suggest the cap rate here with 9.75 would be appropriate.
Okay, but the risk of vacancy, if you got 24 units, 2 apartments being vacant is roughly 10% of the property versus 2 apartments out of 189 is.
Well, on the vacancy issue, Mr. Harden, if you look at the 2015 actual vacancy on the last page of our materials, it was 7%, and we've applied 4.8. So we've stabilized. I'm not going to suggest that all of the cap rate evidence and certainly our evidence is predicated on stabilizing vacancy rates, expenses, and such. And we believe we've been extremely fair in stabilizing it, which results in the NOI that's virtually identical to the assessor. But the 5.75, based on the actual evidence and the fact that we've used an NOI that's fully $80,000 higher than the 2015 actuals, that 5.75 represents a very appropriate rate of return.
Okay, thank you. That's my questions.
You know, I apologize, Mr. Wong, did I ask you if you had any questions?
You did.
I did, okay.
And I said no.
And you said no, okay, I saw you analyzing the report, and I thought I was
No.
calculating
No.
something, okay, thank you. Mr. Merritt, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Reimer, I'm looking at your Altus's cap study,
Yes.
and I'm just looking, date-wise, everything seems to be in order. The only thing that's probably out of order, and Mr. Harden led into that, the the complex is 189 units. So there has to be some sort of factor in there for a cap rate, because in looking at your subject properties, okay, or your comparables, the only big unit is 103.
For that brand new building.
Yeah,
That-
so, and I can see where you come in at the 5 3/4, but I would like to see probably like a better study, if at all possible,
The quick
to compare apples to apples.
Yeah, the quick answer, two things. The quick answer is these sales represent, Mr. Dupont of our office went through, a very, very significant office, went through all of the sales data, and there was many. The upshot of it is that these were the sales that we considered to be valid based on our investigations, and they are, with the exception of Ward, all smaller wards, a property that wouldn't apply here because it's virtually brand new. But again, I'm gonna stress this, and this is important to note, because, and I have talked to property owners and managers. When you've got a large complex with 8 separate buildings, that's a higher risk. You talk about the vacancies, but no, now we've got, and you can see that even from the permits, you've got 8 sets of buildings to keep roofs current on. You've got a massive yard, you've got 8 sets of buildings where they have to replace weeping tiles. So this is a property that, if anything, the expense ratio would be stabilized and the rate of return would be stabilized at a higher level, because a sprawling complex with 8 separate buildings to maintain is going to result in an expense ratio that would typically be higher, or a rate of return that would be higher. In the case of the Stafford property, which is the one I'm alluding to, the expense ratios were very, very similar. The ages are similar and the expense ratios are similar. I am suggesting without question that when you've got this kind of scenario where you've got 8 separate buildings to maintain individually, that at the end of the day is actually going to, yes, you're going to have, you'll have as opposed to having a 4-plex where you've got 1 unit vacant, well, now you've got 25%, okay. Except these are buildings these aren't 4-plexes and 8-plexes. These are 26 units, 22 units, 34 units. They're not insignificant buildings. And they're single buildings where you've got 1 foundation, you've got 1 roof, you've got a very manageable lot. Very, very different dynamics. So again, I'd suggest these provide very good indicators, and if anything, the subject having the configuration the way it does in the longer run is going to result in a higher stabilized maintenance and repair, therefore a lower NOI.
Depends, I guess, Mr. Reimer, on the management.
That's assuming proper management all through.
Yeah. So I can see, I was trying to think it was probably like 1 unit of 189, which it's not. So they're all broken down, and amongst the 9 buildings. So.
And again, recalling, if you're looking specifically at risk in this case, the actual vacancy was quite elevated at 7% and had been increasing. We haven't used 7%, but it's, when you look at the subject, it's not like the vacancy rate was particularly low there either.
But you concluded the NOIs are
Virtually
within
identical.
$10,000.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, again, with the risk being reflected based on the evidence and the fact that we're actually stabilizing it at $80,000 higher than the.
So I'd still like to see some sort of justification in regards to complexes like that, where the subject consists of, a few properties.
Buildings within the same role.
Yeah.
And I'm suggesting
Yeah.
that's a higher risk for the reasons I've suggested.
Yeah.
I have no sales to point you to because there weren't any. So I can't fabricate.
Yeah,
the
yeah,
evidence,
and
but-
I know it's tough. Okay. So, other than that, it's just cap rate?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Merritt. Mr. Reimer, just, I'm gonna go back to this permit.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk about
Yeah,
that.
I'm just curious here. I'm just looking at the 2011 permit on page 25 of the assessor's brief. The older permit where
Yeah.
they've actually installed insulation, new siding. I
Yeah.
guess they benefited from lowering their energy costs from that, I would assume, but, I guess, are you saying that that wouldn't add value to the property?
Every single, any element, every 100% of whatever value is gonna be added, because recall, we're valuing this using the income approach,
Right.
period. So the income approach, whatever value, with the RTV rules, if you've put infrastructure, what's considered to be infrastructure money in, you go to the RTV, you ask for a rent increase above guidelines, and you go through all those hoops. Every single penny of rent increase that would be permitted by this is already included in this. And then taking it further, so this adds no additional value to what's already here. This is incorporated in our.
Okay, so
our
you're
regulation.
saying can only be,
The translation of any
Yeah.
additional value that this would add
Okay.
translates
Has to be in-
into top-line revenue through the RTB of RTB guidelines in these statements. And recall that this is a 2011 permit. The statements are for 2013, 14, and 15. That's why I'm so adamant about the fact that that permit, whatever you would want to consider the value to be added, is fully reflected in these statements, 100%.
So I guess my question is, if this were to go on the market, that would, this
That permit's
re-insulating,
irrelevant.
but re-insulating, physically re-insulating and new siding on it
Yeah.
would be marketed as a plus.
Which is reflected in the income. The reason I'm saying it's irrelevant is that in and of itself is gonna be, well, that's all well and good, but what's your revenue? They're not valuing it by looking at the permits. They're valuing it by
No.
looking at the revenue. And again, any incremental additional revenue that is gonna be generated by that is fully reflected in these statements.
But
see?
you think it might get a bit of a premium?
No.
In the marketplace if somebody looks at it and says, you know, it's being re-insulated?
It's a property that, because again, Mr. Chairman, and I stress this, if the property looks like a dump, your vacancy rate's gonna go up, your NOI is gonna go down, it's not gonna look good. By doing the work they did, they actually are trying to make sure it has good curb appeal, but even with that, the vacancy rate went from 2.4% in 13 up to 7%. That's what the investor's gonna care about. And they're gonna care about these income streams. So no, I don't accept the notion that somehow this would add an incremental value that isn't fully reflected in the statements. I just don't accept that.
Okay, okay. I was just asking your
Yeah,
opinion on it.
absolutely.
All right.
And I'm happy to go through it again if you want.
No, that's okay. No, I was just curious, you know, it's,
Yeah, absolutely.
because often we're presented with permits.
I understand, and certainly there's a time and a place where it depends on the individual situation, but given this particular fact scenario, I'm extremely confident in my position as to how that kind of translates into value in this case.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Wong, any requirement for a summary? Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Ryan?
Chairman.
Okay. That concludes 1681 Pembina Highway. And I guess that concludes our hearing for today.